has grown from £5.5 million, which was the position in July report, to £8.2 million as set out in this report. Section 20 of the report identifies the causes for that increase. The first is that we are proposing to increase the provision for the pay award in 26-27 from 2% to 2.5%. And that's on the basis that the 25-26 pay award was agreed in that period at 3.2%, and also recognition that we're finding inflation is stubbornly above the 3% threshold. So it's just recognising, I think it's going to be harder to agree a pay award at 2% next year. The second issue is an increase in the potential national living wage for 26-27. Previously, we'd assumed 2% in line with our standard assumptions. What this report does is increase it to 4.1% based on a publication from the Low Pay Commission during the course of August. That doesn't mean that will be the increase next year, because that will be something that we expect the government to make an announcement of probably in the autumn budget as part of due process. The other thing that the position allows for is a further increase in the cost of supporting the debt associated with the SEND DSG deficit. You may recall from the Q1 budget monitoring report that the in-year deficit has grown from £57.5 million to £67.2 million. So, that extra deficit needs to be funded through borrowing, and therefore those borrowing consequences feed into next year's budget. Just for memory, the government are giving us a £64.5 million grant in 25-26. We are spending 67.2 on top of that grant, so almost double the amount that they provide us as part of that grant regime. The other thing the position takes account of is the increase assumption in regards to the level of savings efficiencies and additional resources in line with the financial strategy that was set out in the May medium-term financial plan to identify circa £13.3 million, and clearly work is ongoing now to try and identify the rest that are required in order to close the gap for 26-27. In addition, the report provides the actual responses made to two national government consultations that we have discussed through the May and July medium-term financial plan reports, one being the Fair Funding Review 2.0, and the second being the Modernising and Improving the Administration of Council Tax. Both of those, in previous reports, we shared the questions, we had a debate and a discussion about some of the salient issues. What you've got here is the actual responses we made as a local authority. What the report also does is highlight the difficulties local authorities are having with having a clean line of sight on the 26-27 financial planning assumptions. By that I mean that the autumn budget, which in last year was in October 2024, will now not take place until the 26th of November. So that means everything is delayed compared to what we previously have experienced. And those budgets can have a significant impact on local authorities. For example, last year we saw the announcement of an increase in employers' national insurance, and then we had to, we were in a bit of a tailspin and had to cover that additional cost as part of the budget process. We're expecting a policy announcement due sometime during October and November, which might provide some indications of what might come in the provisional local government financial settlement. But what they've stated is that the provisional financial settlement for 26-27 will be based on normal timings. They were hoping to bring it forward, but because the budget's been delayed, they've said actually it will be based on normal timings. What I mean by, or what I assume that means, is when Parliament recesses for Christmas. The House is due to rise on Thursday the 18th of December, and that's when I would expect to get the provisional local government finance settlement for 26-27. Clearly I couldn't guarantee that, but based on normal timings, we got it around about the 18th and 19th last year, so I assume it's something very similar. What the report then goes on to do is provide some benchmarking information. Firstly, in respect of unearmarked reserves, and I think you have a table on page 81 that sets out our level of unearmarked reserves on a net revenue expenditure basis compared to other unitary authorities. Net revenue expenditure takes account of the size of the authority, so it provides, if you like, a like-for-like kind of comparison, and it indicates that the steps made by the administration to improve the financial health and sustainability have helped move the council into the higher side of the mid-range compared to other unitary authorities. So some good positive action, if you like, in the financial health of the council. But the other piece of benchmarking information included in the report is council tax. It highlights that for 25-26, BCP Council had a council tax band D of £1,855.41. That is 2.6% below the unitary average. If we charged at the unitary average, we would generate an extra £7.6 million in resources on an annual basis. What it's at £1,855.41, it is also 13% below our nearest neighbour Dorset, who charged £2,101.05. If we were to charge the same as Dorset, we would generate an extra £37 million per annum towards supporting, if you like, council services. So useful benchmarking information that we tend to look at on an annual basis. But other than that, Chair, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Adam, for that. So just before I open up to everybody to ask questions, make comments, just to add, obviously part of the purpose of this item is for us to look at the report and to give our views ahead of Cabinet taking the report next week. But it was mentioned at our budget conversation event on Friday. I believe it was mentioned at the beginning of each session that if anyone had any recommendations around the budget coming out of those sessions, they could that they would thought were really important to bring up, they could bring them to this meeting this evening. And so I will, once we've kind of gone through our usual process with the report, I will also ask if anyone does have any anything to feed in on that score, as a sort of a way to kind of gather any outcomes from our work on our scrutiny work on Friday around the budget. I hope that makes sense. But for now, I'll invite anyone who would like to ask any questions of Adam or of Councillor Cox, or to make any comments on this report, please. Councillor Canavan.
Just a couple of quick questions, if I may, Chair. Could you just clarify for me the issue in this report about the contingency? My recollection was that there was, in the last budget, a contingency reserve. I think sort of this phrase "optimism bias" was used, and I may not be reading this correctly, but I can't see that that's going to continue. So I'm just querying what provision there is at the moment, anyway, for any kind of reserve in the event that the level of savings that this anticipates are not met. So that was my first question, Chair. The other question is, in paragraph 33, it talks about an options appraisal, but it doesn't actually set out what the options are. Now, my recollection of the previous MTFP report was that there were some, but I don't know where those are. So I don't know what work has been done or is being done against the options which were previously highlighted in the report. So in terms of the comment that you made about the budget event on Friday, I mean, I have to say it's frankly impossible to make any recommendations based on the level of information that we got. just was not enough information to be able to do that. Say a bit more on the library strategy when we get to that point, but on the overall budget, frankly, it didn't help. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Canavan.
Chair, if I can take those issues in turn. With regards to the contingency, the council normally budgets for a standard level of contingency within its budget of just over £2 million on an annual basis. That is to provide for the, if you like, the unforeseen circumstances that you would expect from running an organisation with a gross turnover of around about £800 million per annum, there or thereabouts. So generally that's the normal contingency. I think what Councillor Canavan is referring to, because I think he's remembering quite well, is that when we set the 24-25 budget, the level of savings was remarkably higher compared to what we had to set for this financial year 25-26, because we had to set a level of savings which was £38 million. So because it was so much significantly higher, what we did is we set aside some one-off resources to help with that non-delivery of those savings. And they were set out, if I can turn you to page 78, with regards to the one-off application of some business rates resources, those were the resources that we set out for 24-25, and we drew down on in balancing the 24-25 budget. So they were totally used in order to support the delivery and the balancing of the 24-25 budget position. But standard is around about 2 million per annum, but it is something that I advise council upon when I do my section 25 report around the robustness of the budget and the adequacies of reserves and provisions. So that's something very specifically I mention as part of the annual reporting process.
So is there any of that going forward, Alan?
There will be about £2 million per annum going forward, there or thereabouts, you know, subject to a bit of refinement. But, you know, you would expect a level, you know, clearly accept a level. You know, I've been in positions before where the administration might turn to me and say, actually, you don't need that. And I will be advising, no, it would it would be prudent, it would be reasonable. It's good practice to include a level of contingency within your budget, and then to discuss the value of that contingency. With regards to the options appraisal element of it, that is clearly something that we particularly focus on as part of the budget report, because there are two major options in any budget report. One is the level of council tax, the other is the level of savings efficiencies, service reductions, other kind of changes that you can actually allow for. And clearly that'll be for a matter for members to decide when we go forward as part of the budget process. And every year what you tend to get is, with regards to some of those savings, you will get some alternatives being put forward. And in the past, you know, some people have been put forward not to adjust the savings, but to adjust the council tax as well. You know, and clearly, as we've referenced in this report, not taking the full council tax increase, it impacts on resources in perpetuity. You know, and therefore the government, in their policy, making it very clear to every local authority, they are assuming that we will put up council tax by the maximum allowed for. So that, you know, when we have discussions with them about the resources that we're getting, they will turn to the leader, for example, and say, oh, you're getting an extra 15 million next year. And it's like, oh yeah, well, brilliant. But actually that's the money that we generate from a council tax increase.
Yeah.
So it's not new money, you know, it's money we've already assumed as part of this process. So it just needs to be very clear about, you know, what's under discussion. Clearly, you know, I accept the comment with regards to the budget conversations and the frustrations around the budget conversations, because you can't get into the level of savings and efficiencies under each of those five that are being put forward at this stage, because we don't know all the answers. We don't know what the autumn budget will bring. We don't know what's in the policy statements. We don't know what's in the provisional local government settlement, especially as that provisional local government settlement is coming so late in the day, and it's radically different from the previous years. However, provided the government do what they previously indicate they will do, it should help in the future, because they said that they will, in principle, move to 3-year financial settlements. So hopefully it'll take away some of the variability that we've seen in the past, because at least they'll give you a framework covering a 3-year period. Hopefully that helps the questions.
Yes, Councillor Canavan, does that help with, yeah. I just wanted to come in at that point, if I may, around the budget conversations and the ability that we might have to make any recommendations. Appreciate Councillor Canavan's comments there, but and I agree that we certainly aren't in a position tonight to be making very hard, concrete proposals around any alternative budget proposals, because I don't think any of the services are at the stage where that's feasible. But I think within our function as overview and scrutiny, personally, I feel that there are some areas where some recommendations are possible, and I'd like to come to those a little bit later. I also should have clarified, because Councillor Canavan referenced the library strategy, anything relating to the budget around libraries, I would like us to consider under this item, as we would for all the other items we discussed on Friday, just because we have Adam here and we won't have him here when we're discussing the library strategy. So it would just be helpful, I think, to do anything around recommendations around the library's budget under this item, as we would with the other stuff from Friday, and then come on to the other items around the strategy later on. I hope that makes sense. Councillor Cox, I see, has his hand raised, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just wanted to sympathise, I suppose, with Councillor Canavan about the unsatisfactory nature. I think we all find it incredibly unsatisfactory that we're in this position where everything is having to be delayed until the very, very last minute. I think we will all hate this year's budget process for different reasons possibly, but we will all hate it. In terms of options available, you know, all I can say at the moment is that any options I've seen are usually pretty unacceptable, and therefore, you know, if you're reviewing the options that we were looking at on Friday, it might be an idea to rank them in terms of your priorities, because whichever area you go for, I would beg you not to start putting money aside to think that we have money to spend. We clearly don't.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's a couple of questions for fact I've got. In the report, we reference the 4.1% uplift in national living wage. Do we actually have any of the employees that we employ direct that are on national living wage, or is it just people employed by third parties? That's the first question, perhaps. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if we do them one at a time, what's allowed for here is the impact of the national living wage on the cost of care, i.e. in your scenario, the third parties that are providing that care on our behalf. Generally, to my knowledge, the council pays above the national living wage, or, you know, minimum is there or thereabouts, but generally it's not an issue for the council's directly employed workforce.
Yeah, that's what I assumed on that. The other one is we're 2.6% below the average council tax for unitary authorities, and that seems to equate for a fair bit of money on a year-by-year basis. How does that sort of measure against lost income from the 1 year that this council set a council tax below the maximum that the government seems to expect us to set it at anyway? Does that equate to the sort of amount that we're short by?
Chair, if I may, We are short at this moment in time by £8.2 million. The amount that we would increase if we were at the average would be £7.6 million. That's based on 2.6%. I think you're referring to the fact that across 21-22 and 22-23, you're allowed a bit of discretion between the 2 years. And as an authority, we didn't maximise and go up by the maximum across that 2-year period by the amount of 2.43%. So the answer is, does it amount to 8.2? No, but it's not far off.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Did I have anyone else who wanted to come in? Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions, if I may, to ask of Mr. Richards, and I think, as he indicated just now, he'd like to do them one by one. So if I could go about in that way.
Go ahead.
Could I just take us, first of all, to page 44, item 8, and the fair funding review. And I just think it would be helpful if there was clarification for members of the committee around figure 2. So I think my question is, whether I could ask Mr. Richards for his analysis of the risk implications of specific grants not being rolled into RSG. Should we be reading more into that? And should we be understanding those risks better because they do amount to quite a sizable amount over some really key services? And bearing in mind what the portfolio holder said a moment ago, I think I'd just like to have better clarification of what this part of the report is telling us.
Chair, so what figure 1 and figure 2 in section 7 and 8 are presenting to us is the fact that when it comes to the 26-27 local government funding formula, the government are going to move some specific grants that are normally given us for specific purposes to spend on specific things, and they're going to give it to us in an unring-fenced grant, which means we can spend it on anything we like. And it lists the grants. The most significant of those are the grants they've historically given us, which is called the social care grant, that normally contributes to the cost of social care in both adults and children at £39.52 million. So in future, you'll have absolute discretion as to how locally we spend that. In section 8, figure 2, it talks about the grants that they're not moving into the revenue support grant. For my purposes, because I've probably been around too long, I'm more concerned about the ones they're moving into the revenue support grant. Because if I flip back to the austerity years, what happened is the government moved grants, specific grants, into the revenue support grant, and then reduced the revenue support grant and cut it. So it was a way of moving specific grants into that to take more money off us. Now, there is absolutely no indication that is the agenda of this government, probably quite the contrary. But history indicates that it has been done in the past.
Okay, Councillor Beasley, did you want to ask another question?
Hence my reason for asking the question, actually, because I have experience going back to a previous council of exactly that happening over a sustained period of time. My second question, unsurprisingly, is around the SEND and DSG budgets and the frightening escalation that we see up from 57.5 to 67.2 million this year, to an accumulated deficit of just over £180 million to March 26. My question is around the revenue the revenue budget implications on the interest, which currently amount to, I think, £9.9 million, and whether we could at some stage see the projections in a graphic form rather than just a tabular form, because I think that will really begin to flesh out for members much better the implications of the interest that we are having to suffer to the revenue account. And then also aligned with that, the issue of sustainability. So the cash flow implications, which are stark, frankly, and the sustainability issues. And I suppose what I'm trying to get to ultimately is where the crossover is in a chart around where we run out of money. Just as you would in any business, you want to know not just the size of the problem, but the timing implications. And that I haven't quite got the clarity of from the report in the sense that I'm saying. I just think members generally would find that in graphic form much easier to comprehend for the future. I just wonder, Mr. Richards, whether that's something that you could look to be doing, and whether you have anything to add to my comments, please.
Chair, Councillor Beasley is absolutely correct in the sense that the MTFP as presented to you today indicates that the cost of servicing the debt on the DSG deficit next year will be £9.9 million. And as per your medium-term financial plan, which is set out in Figure 1, that will increase by a further £4.9 million over the next 3-year period. So by the time you get into 28-29, you will be paying £14.8 million in interest on the debt associated with that deficit in that year. So clearly I can set that out and give some consideration to a graphic that shows you that as part of any future report. What's more trickier is the bit around cash flow, because we know as a council we've had a particular issue with regards to cash flow, and there are so many components of that cash flow as to when eventually, or we expect to run out, if you like, of cash in order to service that debt. And we've been on the record in the past as saying we expect that sometime during the course of 25-26, depending on some of those other cash movements during the course of the year. But certainly I can give some considerations to any graphs that could be usefully included in a future report to help members' understanding.
So, Chair, my questions and comments are very much lacking in challenge. They're far more around getting a better and broader understanding of the depth and danger of and imminency of the problems that we're facing. My next one on this is around the unearmarked reserves figure of £27.3 million, and that being in percentage terms somewhat higher than the 5% recommendation from SIPFA, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that at all. What I do wonder about, though, is that if perchance the government do ride to the rescue around the SEND DSG issue in the future and the accumulated deficit, whether they will be looking, in our view, and I know it's a very difficult one to measure, whether they will be looking at us being above 5% at something like 7.91% and clawing back that in any kind of settlement. Are we leaving ourselves vulnerable in that sense by having accumulated those unearmarked reserves? Almost impossible to answer, I do accept that, but I am just flagging up a little bit of a warning that we may find ourselves from a position of relative comfort into a position of relative risk.
Adam, did you want to respond to that?
My response to that would be I don't believe we are exposing ourselves to potential clawback of any excess in that regard. But as you know, I've been around long enough to know you can never say never. So watch this space with regards to any solutions that they pose. But bearing in mind, although we've moved our unearmarked reserves, which is that, to cover the overall risk we face as a council, there are also those earmarked reserves that need to be taken into account, and our earmarked reserves have been going down year upon year under the life of BCP Council. Some of that related to financial management of previous administrations. So, it'd be interesting to see if they ever went anywhere near that, how they dealt with earmarked reserves, at the same time. But I don't believe that they would share.
Okay, thank you. Did you have?
I'll come back on libraries later when we move into that part. of this part of the,
Yes,
of the debate.
if it's related to sort of recommendations around the sort of budget stuff that we looked at on Friday, then perhaps we'll finish looking at the report and then move on to that afterwards.
It was about the budgetary issue, yes,
Yeah.
on that, but I thought other members might want to be speaking first. And I'll
Thank
come
you,
back
yeah.
if
Okay, we'll
that's
come back to
acceptable,
that.
Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Waite, did I see you indicate?
Thank you. Just to build on Councillor Beasley's suggestion about the graph, I don't know if there's, if you're going to present the same information in a table and then the same information in a graph, I mean, what's the point in having two figures? But I think there would be a value in it if you were to kind of overlay it with a lower estimate of what the interest rates might be and a higher rate of what the interest rates might be. So the what's in the table is almost like your middle scenario. And if, I don't know if I'm right, but if I've understood correctly, that as we become more debt ridden, debt becomes more expensive to access, then that will really make everybody panic, won't it? So, put that in the graph, I would suggest.
Adam?
Chair, I'll take on board the recommendation. It's clearly fuel for thought, I think.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anyone else indicating, so if I may, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. So I wanted to there is a mention in the report, brief mention in the report of use of capital receipts from asset disposal up to now, and it notes, I think, that that has been used to fund transformation work in the last financial year and this financial year. I wanted to ask what, if any, plans there are at the moment for continuing to dispose of assets to accrue capital receipts, and then to what to do with those beyond the end of the current financial year. And as a sort of linked question, whether the because I've forgotten, I can't remember whether the flexible use of capital receipts remains in place for the next financial year, because I know there was an extension on that and I can't remember how long for.
Chair, from memory, I think the extension is to 2030,
Oh,
so
fine.
we've got some time
Yeah.
to continue to consider whether this policy is the appropriate for this council. If I just take you back to the current budget, 25-26, when we set the budget for the current year, we set ourselves a target of generating £19 million in capital receipts across the 2-year period, 24-25 and 25-26. That was to finance the, if you like, the historic transformation investment programme, which we officially closed, but there's some residual expenditure, but also the investments we made in children's services and, more significantly, in adult services, because I think there were several programmes we invested in by way of the transformation investment programmes in adults. So those are clearly the things that we will look to do as part of the budget process looking at 26-27. I know the administration is very keen on considering investor saves to see if there are any further, if you like, kind of transformation projects that can come forward where we invest in one way, shape or another, and then that drives down the revenue cost into the future. So that is something that the administration and the leadership team are actively considering at this point in time. But if there are any proposals of any significance, that you would expect them to come forward to Cabinet and Council as standalone items, just like we did for our children's and adults, to gain the necessary approvals. Because if we invest in them through the flexible use of capital receipts, the one thing we've got to see is almost a delivery plan for the savings. And that's almost part of the qualifying conditions in the use of the flexible use of capital receipts.
Okay, thank you. So I think I understand from that yes, there are plans to continue looking at appropriate asset disposal to generate capital receipts into 26-27, and there are a range of potential uses for that money. Thank you. Just my other question was just a bit of clarification. I'm going to have to log back in, sorry, because I've lost my screen, bear with me. Paragraph 25, page 49. There's just bear with me, apologies. Says it's likely that any support from the government will be in the context of a reflection. It's that sentence there, reflection as to whether the current statutory override is helping or hindering. So this is around the DSG deficit, isn't it? I have to say I don't understand what that part of that paragraph means. I just wondered if you could help me.
Chair, if I may, in the sense
Thanks.
that with the current DSG deficit, you'll know that that deficit is greater than all of our reserves added together. In a normal situation, I would be issuing a Section 114 if I forecast that that position would be something that we would be getting to. What the government have done is issue what's called a statutory instrument, and in that statutory instrument, they said, hold on, now with regards to DSG deficit, you can pretend it doesn't exist. You can park it over there on the balance sheet as though it didn't exist, and you can forget about it in regards to that statutory Section 114 issue. Clearly, we can't forget about it because we have to actually fund it by borrowing, and therefore it has an impact on the revenue count. But from an assessment as to whether or not I have to go through the Section 114 route, I can ignore it as part of that process.
Yeah.
And I suppose what that's saying is that the government are thinking about and have made a pledge to return the SEND system to financial sustainability. As part of their reflections, as part of that, they are considering whether this statutory override, which they've extended again to 2030, is that helping us as a nation or is it hindering us? Because you could argue that by allowing everybody to ignore it, it means that we don't tackle it. And therefore, it's just a general reflection about, well, if we hadn't done that and we actually had dealt with it, then we might have had a solution already in place when we started the statutory override 6 years or so ago. Okay. So it's just a reflection. I think they're very much in reflection mode as a government in regards to this issue at the moment, prior to any announcement that may or may not be coming as part of the provisional local government finance element. And I think that's what I was reflected upon there, I think.
Thank you, and I appreciate that we are all just waiting to be told what the government are going to do. And I do just want to reflect on how utterly amazed I am that it's late October and the government said they'd sort this out in 2025. And now we hear that the earliest that's going to be is likely to be a week before Christmas. And no words. Councillor Canavan.
Chair, I wonder if I could just follow that question up. So from a purely financial point of view, is there a judgment as to whether it's hindering or helping?
I think from a purely financial point of view, I think there'll be people on each side of the fence, and I think that goes on to indicate that, because some local authorities that aren't in deficits, they certainly will be challenging, well, if you didn't have this override, then you would have had to deal with it, and we wouldn't have those resources potentially being taken out of the system in order to fund this issue, if indeed that's what happens. So I think it's all about perspective, and I think there will be people on both sides of the line, depending on where their individual local authorities are on their DSG journeys.
Okay, thank you. So I think that from my point of view, I've kind of explored the report as much as I'd like to, and I don't see anyone indicating to ask any further questions. I don't know that does anyone wish to make any sort of recommendations on this report, or are we just going to note it and move on? Doesn't look as though anyone wants to propose anything. Councillor Beasley.
Sure, just to say, as I indicated just now, you were hoping if there was anything on the financial implications for libraries to do that on this item rather than the later item.
Forgive me if I'm not.
I was just trying to follow that through.
Forgive me,
entirely in the context of this paper.
Yeah.
So I did have a couple of points on there, which are around the financials.
And I'm coming on to that in a moment, if I may. Sorry.
Yeah, certainly, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were wrapping it up.
No,
at the same
well,
time.
the report and the
Yeah.
recommendations in the cabinet report. I'm saying are we happy with where we're at with that? We note that, we move on. But then the next thing absolutely was to think about whether people did have any recommendations that came through out of our work on Friday in the budget conversations. Which, as a reminder, there were 5 topics, and one of those was libraries, which we are talking about in our next item. But I did say, could we talk about any budget-related things on that while we still have Adam here? There was also a session on regeneration. There was a session on the plan for play, a session on youth services, and one on public events. So those were the areas we sort of took a bit of a look into in budget terms on Friday. And if anyone did have anything at this point that they wanted to bring forward around recommendations into the budget setting process from us as a board, then now is the time, I think, to bring those forward. And I know that Councillor Beasley has something on libraries, so I'm going to ask him to start.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just before I do, I'm going to page 100 of the library's report, which is a summary of the financial implications. And I omitted to declare an interest. I think it's fairly subsidiary, because I am a member of the board of the Arts Council Southwest, and it refers to Arts Council funding, for which I have no authority whatsoever. So, but I am a member of that board. So a couple of questions, if I may. And in the session that we had on Friday, we, quite for obvious reasons, skirted round the financial implications, because nobody wanted to predict where we would be in the budget process as a result of it, but it does have significant implications. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of them. The first of which I think is the implications around the backlog maintenance issue that affects libraries across BCP, amounting currently to 1.774 million. I'm sure we all know from experience that that will only go one way, upwards, either within the year or following years. And it was really a question of the implications of that financially on the sustainability of the library service and how that is going to be dealt with. Because if it's dealt with in the current budgetary process for 26-27, that would imply that it's pretty much terminal. But if there is a staged and planned programme of works which are already in draft anyway, across the medium-term financial plan, that may alleviate some of that pressure. So that was the first question, Chair.
Okay. Adam, would you like to take that, or did you want to come forward and chip in at this point, or Linda? Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Please do come forward. So we have Matty Roudsep and Linda's surname Linda Anderson here, who are here to talk to the next item, but which is around the library strategy. But since this is a question around the budget to do with libraries, they may be able to feed in at this point. So thank you both for coming forward a little early.
Thank you, Chair. Just perhaps if I start, I'm sure Linda will come in as well. When we talk about the backlog maintenance in relation to our library estate, that's the kind of totality of what we currently face. We do obviously have a repairs and maintenance programme that facilities management teams do, but that's largely currently based on the most urgent works only, so the things that would otherwise result in the closure of a facility. So I suppose the most simple answer is that where something might threaten the opening of a library, then we are trying to address that if it's an urgent item. But there are some things in our library estate that are kind of brewing in the background that, if they were to fail, would be very expensive and very difficult to probably address without additional funds, particularly in relation to roofs. You know, replacing them with a roof can be very expensive. And other matters as well. So I think what the strategy doesn't highlight a solution to that issue. What, you know, in the context of our financial circumstances that Adam's referred to, we're having to kind of work to our highest priorities and spread our resources as carefully as we possibly can. But it doesn't rule out there being some kind of catastrophic issue that would impact on our ability to open a library. But at the moment, we're doing things on those emergency kind of basis. Really, anything else you want to add?
Only to say that we have some work going on at Winton Library, and some of that cost will be included in the table that you have in the report. So that when that's completed, that will reduce that element of it. In terms of other libraries, there's nothing really live going on in terms of actual work, but we are doing the specification for Charminster Roof, because that's probably our most urgent repair need, especially given the intention to go open access. So we're costing that and getting a specification together so we have more accurate figures and precise figures, so that we've then got something to use for bidding purposes or whatever.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Beasley, did you want to say, was there further?
Yes, yes, there was.
So go ahead.
Yes, so following through from that response, I still have concerns that the figure of 1.774 million of backlog maintenance is planned financially, but will it have any implications directly in the 2026-27 budget, which might mean that there are constraints put on because there is no money? So I worry about that. Or is the plan to do those works over a period of time, whilst at the same time other works will no doubt be added to the schedule?
Yeah,
So what I want to be sure of is that we're not going to run out of resource, which will effectively close libraries.
Yeah, that number, as I say, is more of the scale of the issue as it stands right now. It doesn't mean we've got all that money to do all that work, or we've got a programme that we're going to do it next year. We'll only be picking from that the most urgent items. It's just it's in there to explain the kind of current condition of the estate, which is, given the nature of libraries, many of which are in old buildings, that you'd imagine that there will be certain maintenance issues, but that doesn't mean we're going to be able to deal with them in next year. Our wider maintenance resources, which extend not just to our libraries but also into our wider corporate estate, are under significant pressure, and it's very difficult for us to deal with the most urgent items within that budget on an annual basis. That's probably the most truthful position we're at now. So what we would probably be looking to do, Linda mentioned open access, and we'll probably talk about that in the presentation in a moment, but it's looking for alternative sources of funding to help us deal with some of these things. Now that might be from the Arts Council or other sources where we can get it. We're not necessarily assuming the council will have the sorts of money to deal with that backlog maintenance, which, as Councillor Beasley says, will only probably increase as we go through the next years or so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, but I'd like, if I may, I see Councillor Canavan indicating, I'd like, is it also around the libraries? Then in which case, go ahead. I just didn't want to move on from that.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's following on from Councillor Beasley's question, really, about sustainability. Forgive me if this is my misinterpretation, but what I gleaned from Friday's presentation was that, broadly speaking, the balance of income as opposed to expenditure will not change between the current financial year and 26-27, in broad terms. But what I didn't understand or didn't detect was where this other money is coming from. So the money that Councillor Beasley just referred to in terms of maintenance, where is that going to be in the budget? Will there be a specific amount of money in 26-27 for maintenance? So that would be good to know. But also, the money for the money in the plan for the library strategy, it seems to be there to fund the open access and the creation of 4 hubs, and there is, whatever the figure was, 800 and something thousand pounds, which is supposed to be match funding in the hope that we get some money from the Arts Council. Now let's assume we get that money. We've still got to find the match funding money. and I didn't get any positive indication that that money's going to be in the budget for 26, 27 from Friday. So I'm hoping I got that wrong. But the other question that I asked on Friday was, why 4? Why only 4? Why not 6? Why not 8? Why not 10?
Councillor,
And the answer was, it's money.
Councillor Canavan, I'm really sorry. I think this is straying into moving into our next item on the library strategy in
But
terms
where's
of
the money, Chair?
exploring.
Where's the money?
Sorry, I feel that I've probably confused things a little here, but I didn't mean to. And what I wanted to do at this point was simply, if anyone had any specific recommendations relating to the budget areas that we looked into on Friday, coming out of the work we did on Friday, that those be put forward now. But I think we're straying into discussion of the wider strategy, including the budget, which is an important part of that. And I don't want to get into that before we kind of officially get to that item. So if we can hold that and come back to it, I had so in my mind, what this would not take us very long. It would simply be a question of, does anyone have recommendations into budget setting that they would like to put forward as a result of the work that we did on Friday, which included libraries but other areas too. I had a couple of ideas of things that I would like to feed in, so I'm going to put those forward, and hopefully that will give an example of what I'm trying to get out of this last part of this first item. I will start with one on libraries. Given the we've had a little bit of discussion with Adam about the asset disposal programme and what we could maybe be looking at using any money from asset disposal for going forward. I would like to put a recommendation into budget setting at this point that it be considered that some of the asset disposals that we may or may not be able to bring forward in 26, 27, we look at using some of those receipts for to meet the cost of those £1.8 million worth of repairs that we know we need across the library estate. It's straying into our next item, but it would seem to me very clear from the library strategy report that we've had that that is very essential work and would support the library strategy, because we can't have all these lovely ideas of what the libraries are going to do, 24 lovely libraries are going to do, if the buildings are crumbling and being under threat of closure. And so it would seem to me to underpin a large amount of that to be starting to tackle it through, and that's something that as we could do through the budget. So that would be a recommendation I'd like to put forward. And Councillor Dedman.
No, I think it's there.
Is it there?
Yeah, I think.
Sorry,
that's
sorry, Chairman.
right.
I was only going to ask, is that a recommendation? Do you need a seconder? Because I would second it if it was.
Yes, I'm putting that forward as a proposal, and thank you if you're happy to second. I don't know if anyone wanted to come in and say anything on that, or if we wanted to, Councillor Waite.
I am minded not to support it because we've just talked about flexible use of capital receipts, and I just want to survive really for as long as we possibly can, and I don't really want to get into locking money down. I know you said it was to consider, but I don't. Yeah, I mean, there's a priority list so long. I don't know. Is library maintenance at the very, very top of that list? Maybe, maybe not. So I don't really have enough information to go for it.
Okay, yeah. Just to clarify, the recommendation is to consider it. I'm not. It wasn't going as far as to saying we recommend that that is absolutely what should go forward. Just that, you know, as a board, we could recommend it being considered. But fair enough. Did anyone else want to have any? Did anyone else have thoughts or comments on that recommendation? Councillor Dedman.
Well, I'm interested in that idea because my feeling with all the budget, every single line of it, has always been with any council I've been on, you must never ever let the front-facing stuff go. There are lots of things that we do that nobody sees that we do, and we could almost not do them. I can't think of any offhand, unfortunately, but things like libraries are so important. The public use them all the time, and I think that's where if we have something from the asset disposal, which would be good, that would be the way to do it. So yes, that was my reasoning behind it.
Thank you. Anybody else wanting to comment on that recommendation? No. In which case, perhaps we could go to a vote as to whether, as a board, we'd be happy to put that recommendation forward. So, oh, Councillor Cox, apologies. Would you like to come in?
Thanks. I just think I think as Adam explained before, the capital receipts will be used as a sort of flexible use of resources to try and save money elsewhere, basically. So it'll all have to be done on whether actually it will work financially and whether it will, you know, it is worthwhile, whether it will save money in the longer run. And I think the fact that you were asking it for it to be considered, then I think it would be up to presumably the library service to consider that. And maybe it should, you know, maybe it's an asset disposal from the library service that should be used to do that, or you may be turning around and saying an asset disposal from somewhere else. But anyway, I just thought I think you've already explained that you just want it to be considered, which is fine, and that it needs to be considered as to whether it's financially worthwhile.
Thank you, Councillor Potts. Yes. So I hope I'm being clear. The recommendation is that as part of budget setting, that the consideration is given to using asset disposal through 26-27 to generate receipts that could be used to do the maintenance and repairs that are identified within the library strategy on the library stock, on the library buildings. And I absolutely recognise that this is part of a much bigger picture, and there are lots of other aspects of the budget that need to be taken into consideration. So there's no sense in which this is meant to be anything more than just, I suppose, a recognition, if the board agrees with this and votes for it, that we would like to see, you know, some money being put that way, and that's somewhere it could be looked at for that money, the money to be found. I hope that makes sense. I think, Claire, can I ask, have you got a sensible form of words for a recommendation around this? Because that's probably a good indication.
So as
whether I'm being remotely clear.
Yes, so your recommendation is that as part of the budget setting process, consideration be given to receipts received through the asset disposal programme through 2026-27 to be used to look at some of the to address some of the maintenance issues within the library's estate.
Thank you. Okay, does that sound all right? Okay, Adam.
Chair, can I just touch on a sensitive issue here?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that, are you, in making that recommendation, suggesting this is receipts that are already funding the Investor Save sort of programs that might be redirected? This is receipts from sales of assets that are delivering other services of the council? Or are you suggesting that in considering that, we consider whether or not it's possible to sell some library assets in order to fund and improve other library assets? I'm not quite sure out of those three scenarios which one you're suggesting.
Okay, so I am coming at this from the angle of someone who sits on the asset disposal working group, which, and have done so for the last 2.5 years, in which we look across the whole estate at surplus, redundant assets, which we might dispose of. I am not suggesting that any of our libraries are those at all. And I think that the strategy that we're looking at in the next item is very clear, that the intention is to hold on to all of those libraries and find ways to do that. And I am very supportive of that. So no, I was not suggesting that we look at rationalising the library estate. That was not what I was trying to suggest. I was trying to suggest that we might, in budget setting, consider whether or not we could use, we will have a, as I understood, I asked you earlier, we will continue to look at disposal of corporate assets on the same basis that we have been for the last, to my knowledge, 2.5 years, I no longer, that we could use the receipts from that towards the repairs and maintenance that we know are needed within the library's estate. Or, as I say, or a consideration be given to that within budget setting.
So it's giving consideration, if I may, Chair, to those disposals that are already part of the programme that at this moment in time the Cabinet would be considering for investment in investor saves, for example, taking some of that money and redirecting it to fund the backlog in libraries as opposed to the backlog in any other service. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Councillor Beasley, I think you indicated.
Yes, I did, Chair. I desperately want to support your move, but I don't think I can, because I think the interpretation of that, were we to agree it by others, won't be favourable to keeping all of the libraries open. I think that will be an issue that then arises from it, from those who perhaps weren't present here in this discussion, and I'd be much more comfortable if the library service were looking at all the assets and coming to whatever conclusion they come to with regard to backlog repairs over time, perhaps, as we've discussed already, and rather than, if you like, almost setting ourselves up, as it will happen, I'm sure, that at last resort we would countenance the closure of libraries, if you like, of a library or more than one library, to fund the shortfall in backlog maintenance. I also have an issue because of, I think Mr. Richards has explained it very well as to what the options might be. It is very difficult once an asset has been declared surplus, it's in play, and it could very easily be that the outcome of this is that one or more libraries become declared surplus as well. And it's for those reasons that reluctantly I can't support the move, I'm afraid.
Okay. Did anyone else want to say anything on that? Councillor Dedman.
Well, having heard all these ramifications from it, I wonder if we should just let that lie and just not put forward. I mean, I'm happy to second it if you want to go for it, but I can see what Councillor Beasley means. So, up to you, Chairman.
Okay. All right. I think if you don't want to second any longer, then Councillor Dedman, and that's fine.
No,
and then I think it would fall away.
No, I
because
didn't.
I wouldn't have a seconder.
No, I didn't say that, Chairman. I'm happy
No, I
to go
know.
to vote on it, but I just wonder if, bearing in mind what Councillor Beasley so wisely said, I do not want to see anything termed as, like, you know, an asset that we don't want termed as an asset.
Okay.
No, still happy to second if you're doing it.
Perhaps it's about clarifying the wording. To be really clear, I am talking about a process that we have, an established process that the council has, which is around asset disposal. So I'm not talking about introducing any kind of new process or any kind of new set of circumstances here. We have a process around disposal of surplus assets, and currently the capital receipts from that are used to fund transformation programmes up to the end of this financial year. I asked a question earlier about what would be the potential for what is the plan for using that to any further capital receipts in future years. I was given an answer around that the administration are considering invest to save opportunities. All I'm doing here is asking if they, as part of budget setting, they would consider whether or not using some of the money from the existing surplus asset disposal process could be put towards the known amount of repairs and maintenance of our library's estate that's been put in front of us today, a figure of 1.8 million. Personally, don't think there is a risk of that being misconstrued as me saying we should sell libraries, but fine. If others think that, then okay. Councillor Trent.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the point which I almost agree with is that you want to prioritise public-facing assets, and I think Councillor Dedman was absolutely right on that. And I would be easy with it if it was worded to support maintaining public-facing assets rather than specifically libraries, because then it's kind of left a little bit more open. Because I do think that if things get difficult, but property is disposed of, we've got various buildings dotted around that are used sort of less than others, but I just want to see the things that the people see, like the libraries, to be looked after as best as possible. So if it was reworded, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable about it, but the libraries, I take the point that it could be misconstrued. So
Okay. Claire, if I would be perfectly happy to make that amendment to more generally public-facing assets, if that's a terminology that people are happy with. But Claire, are you happy with that? Could you incorporate that into a revised recommendation?
Of course, Chair. Can I just check then, that did you want to, so I'll read out what I've got as the recommendation. As part of the budget setting process, consideration be given to utilising receipts from the existing surplus asset disposal programme through 2026-27 to address some of is it to address repairs and maintenance to publicly facing assets, or is it just publicly facing assets in general and take out?
I suppose it's repairs and maintenance. Yeah.
So to address repairs and maintenance to publicly facing assets then.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. I'm happy with that. Councillor Dedman, are you still happy with that wording?
Yes, just very happy, Chair.
Thank you. So if we could maybe go to a vote, since time is marching on. All those in favour of that recommendation from the board, could they please raise their hands?
And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favour. 7 in favour, sorry.
And all those against?
That's 1 against.
And any abstentions?
2 abstentions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. I find it really hard making recommendations on the hoof in committee, but we've done one, so that's good. Did anyone have any other recommendations out of Friday's budget conversations that they wanted to put forward at this point? Otherwise, we will move on to our next item of business. No, I'm not seeing any indications, in which case I'm going to say thank you very much to Adam for the report and to Councillor Cox as well, although obviously feel free to stay with us if you wish. And we will, I think, take a 5-minute comfort break and then come back and look at the library strategy report. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Welcome back, members, to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. We're moving on now to item 9 on the agenda, which is the draft library strategy. And we have a report in our agenda packs, and I'm going to invite Councillor Andy Martin, the portfolio holder for Customer Communications and Culture, to present the report. We also have with us, who we've already heard from earlier, thank you for coming into our discussion slightly earlier, Matty Rowdsep, the Director for Customer and Property, and Linda Anderson, the Head of Customer and Libraries. But first of all, as I say, I will hand over to Councillor Andy Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and my apologies for not being there in person this evening. As I think you know, I'm working away. I sort of say this slightly with a smile on my face, but I have to say I did listen in a little bit of frustration in the last bit of the debate when we're talking, you know, the spectre of library closures became part of the narrative just before we're having a discussion about a strategy that says we want to keep our 24 libraries. Anyway, be that as it may, I'd just like to make a few introductory remarks. In fact, I think Linda's going to present the key detail of the report, although I would like to come back in later, if I may, and comment on certain key aspects of it, including certainly arts and culture, public health, and the role of Arts Council England. Could I just actually also say what I should have mentioned in terms of capital investment in our libraries? That is something I've been talking about inside and outside the council for some while, and my belief that it is long overdue that our libraries are invested in by the council in terms of capital and repairs. And it's so this is not something that's only just come up, but I'm sure we'll come back to that again. So can I just say I'm very pleased to introduce this 5-year strategy, which I believe is one of real ambition and real imagination for our BCP libraries. I think it's a strategy that recognises the crucial role that all our libraries play in our communities, especially in a time that where we're still in austerity, or local government is still in austerity. It's never come out of it, and where so much of our public life and our public realm is either gone or broken. And I think it's a strategy that, and I have used this phrase before, but I think it's really important, a strategy that recognises that in so many ways our libraries are quite possibly the first line of defence. And actually, Councillor Dedman talked about public-facing assets, public-facing buildings. They are our first line of defence, and they are our last line of defence when we've lost so much in our communities. And I think also the library strategy recognises that libraries are our anchor institutions. They are safe and neutral spaces, they're warm spaces, they're places of education, lifelong learning, of laughter, of creativity, of culture, of information and support and health and well-being, and equally where people of all ages, from the youngest in our communities to the oldest in our communities, can be alone and together at the same time. And much of the value of libraries, and I don't think enough is made of this, I mean, it is in the strategy, but not more generally in society, is preventative. And so investing in them can bring huge returns for our communities. This is a strategy also that relies on much stronger partnerships in the community with organisations, with community groups, and with the communities themselves. I think the strategy does talk in some length about that. But equally, and I think this is perhaps more important than anything, it requires this council, every directorate in this council, to make it work. Adult social care, children's, events, cultural development, customer, housing, communities, public health, economic development. This strategy needs the support and the input of all those parts of the council, because these are our institutions. I was very heartened the other day, I can't remember which meeting it was now, but to hear the new chief executive refer in the context of a discussion on adult social care to the clear link between adult social care, culture, and our library network. And I think that's really heartening. Before I hand over to Linda, and as I said, I would like to come back on a few other points later. Can I thank Matty and Linda particularly, and her team, and Lisa Stutchbury for the consultation work on the strategy, and the external groups and organisations, in particular the arts and culture organisations, and in the public health sphere. We've had valuable input from all of those, and that's been really helpful. And I should also like to thank colleagues around the table and from other political groups for their input too. So a number of your committee members around the table, we've talked about the library strategy in its formulation. So that again has been great, and I think we have reached, without question, I believe we've reached a really strong degree of political consensus about what our library service needs to be and how we get there. And I'm sure we'll discuss some of that a little bit later on. But in terms of the detail of some of the key points, I'm happy to hand over to Linda. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. And yes, I'll hand over now to Linda to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So following on from Andy's introduction, so this is the draft library strategy. It's been worked up over probably about 18 months, 2 years, by going through a really comprehensive consultation programme, both online, in libraries, and as part of a sample survey out across the conurbation, to gather views of all our residents about what they wanted the library service to be. We've come up with 3 main priorities for the service, which fit nationally with those of the universal offers, which are backed by the DCMS and various library groups. And ultimately they are to provide literacy, reading and study opportunities, to access technology and digital learning, and create healthy and creative communities. In addition, the library strategy aims to set out a pathway to a more modern library service that recognises all those things that Andy have just talked about warm spaces, places where people can go, be with other people, communities, contribute to well-being, etc. In terms of the headlines from the strategy, as you've heard already, it is about keeping all 24 of our libraries open and having that commitment to that. It is a challenge given the condition of the buildings, given the cost of staffing those libraries, and therefore we are looking at being a bit more innovative about that, and adopting open access technology to enable our libraries to be open for longer. We've gone with 4 libraries initially. That's basically because of the thresholds on the funding that we could access. So we've submitted a bid to the Arts Council. Maximum funding opportunity there is £500,000. And looking at our libraries and what we need to do in our libraries to get them to a state that could function under staffless hours, that's what the money would accommodate. So we've gone for 4 libraries. We won't know until earliest December, possibly not until March, whether we've been successful with that funding or not. And we've gone in on the basis of a £387,000 grant, matched by just shy of £87,000 contribution from the council. That, to answer one of the earlier questions, is being funded by the library service budget. So we're preparing for that. If we don't get the money, we don't get the money. We'll have to look at other ways of trying to bring open access in, but I think it's definitely going to be part of the strategy, whatever, because it is a way in which we can get those buildings used by the public for more hours than we can physically staff them on our budgets. We've looked at how people use our libraries. So we could see some habits. People in the survey set out which libraries they mostly go to, but also the other libraries that they go to. And there does seem to be a bit of a pattern. And we've created 4 clusters, if you like, based on usage of where people go. And we can then start to see what the options are for people within those clusters. If they can't get to one library, they might be able to get to another. But we also have the figures which tell us how many people solely use one library, so we can keep an eye on that as well from an accessibility perspective. The aspiration is to create community hubs in those 4 libraries with open access. It will be a staged process, that won't happen quickly, but we will work towards that over the life of the strategy, which is a document to take us through the next 5 years. We've highlighted some concerns about some buildings. You've already mentioned the repairing needs on libraries. Some of that is building maintenance, probably half and half really, building versus mechanical and electrical. So a lot of the heating systems in our libraries are failing, and we're trying to keep them going. In addition to the open access technology and moving towards community hubs, we're really keen to encourage friends groups to be able to help us with improvements within our libraries, take on some responsibilities to enable us to do what our communities want them to be, and we've put a framework in place to aid that. We'll get that live on the website as soon as we've gone through Cabinet with the paper, and we can start supporting those groups to work with us. We also are committed to continuing. We've got a lot of volunteers in our libraries. We've formed kind of role profiles for different opportunities for people to volunteer, so that we'll try and continue to expand that to bring some capacity into those libraries and get groups and different opportunities running. I think that's the main point. If I just check on the recommendations, see if I've missed any. We've got the clusters. We've got, I didn't mention the 4 libraries in terms of the open access. So there's Hamworthy, Rossmore, Southbourne and Charminster, and hopefully you'll have noted that it's 1 in each cluster. So the idea is we have 1 customer hub in each cluster, 1 community hub in each cluster, and then you've got your other kind of medium and lower use libraries, providing quite a mix. Yeah, in terms of delivering the action plan, it really is about just working through those options, putting frameworks in place, trying to encourage fundraising for some of the things we want to do. Obviously, we've got one thing the library strategy consultation has done is given us lists of things that people want. So we've got, you know, from small items to larger items to repairing needs, that we've got a really clear picture of what local communities want in their libraries, and things like study desks and children would like bean bags and things like that to make cosy areas and zone areas. So we will do that over the life of the strategy and really start to look at the stock on the shelves. A lot of people told us that the stock could do with refreshing and refining. We've got a lot of stock on our shelves that doesn't borrow, doesn't go out. So we'll be looking at things like that to try and create some more spaces to do that zoning for making libraries more attractive to the different user groups. And I think Andy will come in and talk about arts and culture separately as well after. So I think I've covered most of the key points.
Thank you very much, Linda. That's great. Yes, we can pick up other things if we need to as we go forward, I'm sure. So then I'll open this out to the members of the board, and if anyone would like to ask anything. Councillor Northover, first of all.
Thank you. I think the draft is, I'm pleased to see that there is an aim to keep all of the libraries open rather than start to lose 1 or 2. I thought the report, it could be, sorry, I keep calling it a report, the strategy maybe should, I wasn't sure if some of the appendix will be included in the actual strategy when it's published, because I think that data is quite important for people to understand, particularly how low some of the usage is in some of the libraries. I think I've seen some of that before, and I was actually quite sort of shocked that some places don't really have that much use really, and it does change your change the way you read it when you actually realise that you know, there's not hundreds of people necessarily going every day. I wondered about, I couldn't see it, sorry if I've missed it. Is there some data around any that have sort of community rooms and things like that, and whether or not they're used much, or do they have sort of one group that's using them? Yeah, I'll stop there and you can answer if you wanted to.
Thank you.
Chair. No, there's nothing in the strategy, but we do have that information. So on the website, we've published which libraries have rooms to rent, how much they cost, what sort of size they are. Not all of them are used. It's been a bit of a declining. We're finding that people want to use community rooms, they don't necessarily want to pay.
Yeah.
And obviously we have to have that income generation side, and we have income expectation around our meeting rooms. Which I don't know whether you were at the session on Friday, you would have seen some of that in the budget discussion, but certainly it's one of our areas where we do get income in, but it's not a massive area.
Could I just come back and make one point about that? Have I got, is that supposed to be both of them on? It was just that I know in some areas we tend to have a lot of sort of initiatives that cause some sort of hub to be opened, and it's a real shame that that sort of, when there is investment in an area, that money couldn't go to the, you know, using, if a library has got a room that's underused, perhaps using that rather than keep reinventing these. Near to where I live, there's sort of about 3 sort of hubs that have been set up over the years for things, and a couple of them are sort of, it's not even clear if they're even open, but they sort of come and they go. But if all of that energy always could be directed towards things that we've already got, like libraries, it would save that money being sort of wasted. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Northover. Yes, Matty, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I was just going to also mention in the context of that the community hubs that we've talked about with automated access is partly to ensure that the buildings are available more of the time to more of the people, which might mean there's more opportunities for people to use some of the facilities in the larger libraries. The ones we've chosen in the initial 4 are the ones that have more scope to offer more space for people to use them when our staff might not be there. It doesn't mean that the 4 are the end of it, because actually you could still use automated access in much smaller libraries, but there clearly aren't so many opportunities in the smaller libraries for other activities. So just to really stress that point, you know, to make them more useful to people, we want them to be available more often, and automated access is the way of doing that without increasing our staff costs, because that's not the place we're currently in.
Thank you. Yes, so Councillor Trent, and then I'll come to you, Councillor McGraw.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things I'm struggling with at the moment is visualising what's in mine. So the open access, and Rossmore Library is one of the 4 libraries that are earmarked for that. But how would you ensure the access without risking the security of the building and the books and things like that? You know, it's there's a bit of a balance to be struck there, but I do feel that because at the moment, because it well, talking about Rossmore specifically, because it closes at 5, a lot of people who might pop in there on the way back from work or whatever and pick up a book don't. You know, unless they're picking up children from school, they're not going to be passing there at the right time of day. Or if they're going to the gym tends to, you know, which is nearby, that tends to be early or later on that it reaches a peak. So I'm sort of trying to picture how that works. Also, you mentioned the desirability of having friends groups. 3 of the 4 areas that you've highlighted are areas where it's very difficult getting people engaged. And in the first place, out of those 4 areas, only Southbourne is an area where there's, you know, getting people sort of engaged in the way it's operating. You know, I know that there's a community group nearby, and the actual getting the local people engaged is very difficult. There's so few people actually engaged on a day-to-day basis compared to what was intended, and people are coming from sort of slightly outside the area that it affects. So I'm sort of worried about, depending on that side, when it comes to the use of facilities, again, talking about Rossmore Library, there seemed to be one regular group that was using it. They've since moved to another facility. So it'd be interesting to know how many groups are using that at the moment. As I've had a discussion just a little while ago, actually, there are 2 useful rooms in addition to the ground floor of Rossmore Library that could be being used more. And it's a warm space, and can you extend the opening of it and provide the warm space, or does that become an issue? Because it was one of the nominated places for during the height of sort of COVID and the fuel crisis and so on. It was one of the places highlighted as a warm space, and I know that Rossmore's also got a community fridge and sort of store which is accessed on a regular basis. So it's really how it's going to sort of work and how you get groups of people involved as friends. It's the practicalities of it. I'm sort of not quite sure how it, I can't visualize it.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Linda, would you like to take some of or all of those questions?
In terms of open access and how it works, there's lots of things to consider. So we've done a run through of lots of those things, obviously, in creating our bid to submit to the Arts Council. We've had to think it through in quite a lot of detail, and we've had a surveyor work with us to think about the building aspects of it. So that, in short, to enjoy open access, you have to sign up and observe terms and conditions for starters. You need to be over a certain age, so it won't be young children or anything allowed in on their own. Obviously, children come with a parent or guardian or family member. But most organisations allow open access from 16 or 18. So sometimes 16 is important for those children doing GCSEs, want to use it for study of an evening. But you have them sign up through the process, and you go through an induction with them so they know what to expect when they're entering the building. You have lots of facilities in there, so effectively you have a piece of kit that goes on your main door that you can use your library card to swipe in on, and that obviously will detect that you've come in. You have to have guidelines in place about tailgating, things like that, like you'd find in the Civic Centre. And obviously people will be the eyes and ears, and most councils find that actually they self-police in a lot of ways. People will happily tell you if someone's misbehaving, etc. Don't generally get antisocial behaviour in them, as much as that is what is feared by most people. There is provision to put cameras in, so the cameras will be in so we can see what's going on in those libraries. If we know that somebody is misbehaving, we can automatically cut the access to their card so they can't get into the building. We've costed into it an evening sweep of the buildings from a security guard, so they will do a route round, sweep the buildings, make sure people have left, they aren't bedding down for the evening or deciding to stay, for later than we want them to. So there's a lot of measures in there. We don't know everything. It's new to us as it is, to you guys. So we will work through all those issues and problems. But what we have got is a wealth of authorities that have done it that we can speak to and say, well, how did you manage this? How did you manage that? We've taken account of specific areas in those 4 locations to think, right, well, we need to secure those areas. We don't want people going into that area or this area. So we've done quite a lot of work already. We will need to go through a procurement exercise to get the technology in for the doors. So we're kind of pre-writing that tender now, so that if we do get the money, we're ready to go. Because one of the things about the money is once you know you've got it, you've only got 3 months in which to start. So it's quite, you've got to be out of the blocks quite quickly on all of that. So that's how open access works. Generally, people find it's fine. There'll be a toilet accessible. We're looking at other things like, can people print and use photocopiers when there's no staff there? And the staff will have to adapt as well, you know, because there'll be slightly different ways of working. You're going to come in of a morning and you won't have been open the day before, and you don't know what you're going to find, do you? You know, books need to read shelves and stuff like that. So there's a fair bit to work through, but we'll aim to take the staff with us on that journey, and work out, you know, any problems that come. But generally, the problems that come are what you'll find in everyday life. Someone might steal a book, mightn't they? But they might when you're open, with staff there. And it's all about risk and balance. In terms of Rossmore, the meeting rooms are not largely used at Rossmore. As you said, people have gone elsewhere because they can get them free or cheaper, in church halls and stuff like that. So they're not massively used, but I can get the library manager to share some information if you want to know the groups working out of there.
Yeah, thanks. It sounds a positive idea, but I just, you know, trying to get my head around how it functions. But, you know, it'd be really nice if it works, because one of the early thoughts in the creation of the Rossmore Library in that place and the design of it was for it to be open, for example, to school children to sort of use it and so on. You know, it was a disadvantaged area. They wanted sort of youngsters to come in from the school and do a bit of study there. You know, there was a sort of a vision for it, which hasn't been totally realised, but it would be really nice to see that. And I'm assuming that Councillor Martin will talk about sort of cultural events, because I know that in the past we've actually had live music at Rossmore Library, which was quite successful. I'm not sure whether the people who attended were the targeted audience or what, but you know, it was quite good. It was well, the one I went to was linked to National Poetry Week and so on, and you know, we had quite a major artist actually involved in it, and so, you know, I would welcome that, but I think that's going to be raised as a separate issue. But, you know, it looks positive, but just kind of understanding how it works.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. I mean, I wonder if now is the moment, since you've raised the cultural offer side of things, to ask Councillor Martin if he did want to say a little bit more on that.
Yeah, by all means, thank you, Chair. I don't think it'll be any great surprise to anyone, given the other part of my portfolio, or one of the other parts, that arts and culture plays a key part in the strategy, or hopefully will play a key part in the strategy in executing it. All I would say is that we have a fantastic cultural community across BCP. I'm not just talking about, you know, the big names that we talk about, but I'm talking about the Boscombe Emerging Arts Festival, the hundreds of individual artists and performers across BCP, and these artists and creators of all types are always looking for venues to perform, to showcase their work, to exhibit their work, to draw people in to hold workshops, and I just can't think of better places than our libraries to be able to be seen as venues. It was interesting. Tony mentioned, you know, people popping in after work to pick up a book. To me, that's just one part. You know, that's just one small part of what a library needs to be, and that's what the strategy is aimed at. It is about books, of course it is, but it's also about going to see things and do things. I went to an incredible touring show by the English Youth Ballet, I think it was English Youth Ballet, which was an environmental thing aimed at children at Bournemouth Library. Brilliant. There were 300 school children there. So we can use our libraries as venues, working with the cultural community. And I've already had conversations with the BCP Cultural Compact. That is our cultural compact. BCP, we fund it. So there's some amazing work going on there with a whole range of artists who you wouldn't probably never have heard of. And they've already, the BCP Cultural Compact, which is led by Helen Keel, who is the chief executive of Pavilion Dance, through the Cultural Compact and through Pavilion Dance, she's already having conversations with the library service, with individual libraries, about being able to put things on there, delivering arts and culture in a number of libraries, including in our deprived communities, may I say, with funding that's coming from outside organisations. There's a particular trust that is helping to fund those things. I won't mention who it is because I'm not sure I'm allowed to at this stage, but that work is already underway, and that's just one small part of how we can turn our libraries into places that are, like Councillor Trent says, they're loud as well. It's long. It should be a long since gone where libraries are places where people tell you to, shh, be quiet. They need to be places of noise as well. So I think that's really important. And just one other really good example, the Bournemouth Writing Festival, which has been going for 3 years, it's just grown and grown and grown. And the Bournemouth Writing Festival uses our libraries to host things, and intends to do more. So there's plenty of examples of work that's going on already, and I'm sure we have. Well, I know we have the buy-in of the arts and cultural community to help that with that part of the library strategy. Just one other thing relating to health, if I may, and that is. So there's a bit of a public health narrative in there because I've had conversation with Rob Carroll, our Director of Public Health, about how the public health BCP can use the library service, the libraries, to further our public health goals. And he's looking into that. And there are plenty of ways that can happen. And also, our libraries can be fully plugged into the creative health strategy that's being drawn up by NHS Dorset with a range of stakeholders. And one of those stakeholders who's inputting into this is BCP Council. So I wanted to balance the arts and culture with the public health thing. And one final thing, if I may say so, I did want to mention about Arts Council England because it's been mentioned several times. And I know Councillor Beasley will share my thanks to Arts Council England about how they are a real supporter of what happens in BCP in culture. One of the longer term ambitions that I have in this strategy, whether it'll ever happen, I don't know, because it will outlast me as portfolio holder before it ever comes in, if it does come in, and that's for sure. And that is that our library service could become a national portfolio organisation with Arts Council England, with all the opportunities and investments for our communities that would bring. I'm not going to go into what that actually means, but there are some brilliant examples around the country. I'm thinking about Gloucestershire and particularly about St Helens, which I'm familiar with, where Arts Council England have been funding and helping the library service since 2018 to help St Helens libraries. They only have 7, not 24, to establish themselves as real beacons of arts and culture in the region, and obviously at the same time helping to bring libraries into much wider use as well. So I think those are 3 really important things that I am glad to see in the report, and obviously happy to answer any questions, but hopefully we'll see this develop. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. I think the next person I had was Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Chair. I've made some notes just to keep me on track because in my airy-fairy world, I've got this wish list of everything that I would like to see happen. And regarding Councillor Trent's comments regarding spaces that are not used and could be used. So my laptop's going to shut down in a minute. So I have done some research previously, but I brought it up now. The Library of Things. That would be, as Councillor Martin said, his ambitions. Like I say, it's my airy-fairy world where you going to pick up a book, you go pick up a strimmer because you don't need to buy a strimmer because then that is in my reduce, reuse and recycle ethic. And also say like a repair shop type thing where people are being educated in things that they can do once they've been shown, as in say like sewing up hems on school trousers. So yeah. So my biggest thing is what we've got, really utilise what we've got and bring those people in. And I will finish this. I have a bucket list, and on my bucket list of quite a few things, but I won't go through it, is I've always wanted to be locked in a library, like the Natural History Museum, because I love the smell of books, and to be locked in a library with a sleeping bag and a torch, that is a bucket list tick that I do want to achieve. So sorry if I've rambled on, but I get so excited about things, and I just want. Yeah, that's a point. Night at the museum, yeah. Yeah, I just get a bit excited and a bit carried away, and I think I might need to calm down. But hey, let's put it this way: if we don't do things, how will you know if it's going to work? But like you say, it's cost, resources. But I'm all for getting the community behind projects and things. So ask our community, what do you want from our library service? Come on, and any idea is not a silly idea.
Thank you,
And get behind my idea if you can. And look it up. It's the Library of Things. And I'll say this very quickly. In my research, we don't have any in our area. In Mudderfoot and Stampit, there are 5 people who have signed the petition to get one going. In Bournemouth, 37. And in Poole, 14. So later on, when I've recharged my laptop, I'm going to put my name to the petition.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Macro. There's almost a recommendation in there, maybe. But maybe let Linda, Matty, Andy, Councillor Martin, sorry, come back in if you want to on any of those points, first of all.
Well, lots of libraries have libraries of things and things like that, you know, from 3D printing machines to, you know, print stuff to, as you say, you know, repairing stuff, borrowing strimmers, borrowing food mixers, you know, things like that. They do exist. A lot of people do that through small grants, micro grants, funding from Arts Council and other places to set those things up, because obviously there's a cost to it. At the minute, we're just trying to tackle the bigger costs. But that would fall in with how, when we start to work on community hubs, which, you know, will be a little bit down the line, that's exactly what we'll be doing. You know, we don't have a vision of what a community hub's going to be yet in terms of the, you know, what is right for one community over another. That's where we will ask the community, ask the friends group, anyone else listed into those library service to help us design what that hub looks like in that particular location. And then it'll be about how we go about trying to get the funding to make that happen.
Thank you. I see Councillor Martin indicating as well. Did you want to respond to Councillor Macro?
Just in a slightly light-hearted way, but I think the idea of being locked in the library is absolutely brilliant, and I'm going to suggest that to Dominic Wong, the chief executive of the Bournemouth Writing Festival. A night locked in the library, reading, you know, reading aloud, reading to each other. I think that could catch on. So I think that's a brilliant idea, Sandra. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. I'm conscious. Councillor Beasley told me that he has to leave, and he wants to speak. He's not next on my list, but I'm going to let him speak because I know he needs to leave. Go ahead, Councillor Beasley.
That's very generous. Thank you very much indeed, Chair. First of all, I just wanted to endorse this draft library strategy, as I'm sure will be the collective view of this committee. And I make no secret of the fact that I'm an advocate for libraries. I always have been, and I want to see all 24 libraries within BCP retained and enhanced and given a future that is sustainable, as we have to do in everything to do with arts and culture. It hasn't got a sustainable future, and if we don't find a path to that, we will lose it. It's as true of libraries as it is for anything else in arts and culture, and I'm sure the portfolio holder will heartily agree with that. I'm intrigued by the opportunity of BCP becoming a national portfolio organisation as far as Arts Council England's concerned. Again, if we could achieve that, that would be a very significant step forward. I was very pleased to hear the description of how open access would work in practice, because I, like many, probably had some concerns. And again, I think that is learning from others, and I think we have a marvellous opportunity with open access to really do what it says on the tin, open and access. I think that is absolutely critical to the sustainable opportunity that is in front of us for a modern library service. And I think there's always been a reluctance to become too modern in the library service, if I can put it that way, that will frighten the core users or something like that. We shouldn't be, and I think we should be innovative to make that work. Just wanted to say, that I think within the report, Appendix 2 is fascinating data, and that is about the number of users of a particular library, which other libraries they use. If I could suggest, since this is only in draft at this stage, I think that needs a bit more explanation, because that data set could be used or could be misinterpreted as and become a reason for actually slimming down the service if we're not careful. So I think it needs further dialogue around it to make it seem far more instructive than it does at the moment. It's only a suggestion, but I think it would perhaps be useful to readers of the report to understand that. My other issue, Chair, is, as it always has been, is about making libraries, dare I say it, more commercial. And we've gone a little bit of the way in this report. I hope for the future, for the next one and the one following that, that it will be about trying to give it a financially sustainable future by using libraries as hubs for other council services, other public services. I know one in Westbourne we've managed to get the police using it as a centre because it's not close to their HQ in Bournemouth, and perhaps even getting more commercialisation into them, because all of this, to make it sustainable, has to be revenue producing. And we can do a lot of good things which produce no revenue but are for the public good. But unless we get the revenue coming in, we'll never ever in the longer term manage to continue to balance the budget, and therefore libraries will be under greater financial pressure. And that's what's got to be relieved, I believe. So very, very good report, and I'm happy that I certainly would endorse it and want to build on it for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley. Did Linda, Matty or Councillor Martin want to respond to any of those points, or are we happy to move on? Thank you for that. So I have Councillor Goodall next.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just declare an interest in the sense that Parkstone is in my ward, and I just wanted to chew the cud on this a bit for a few minutes, if I may. The point I was really wanting to make, as far as the library itself is concerned, this may be a metaphor for other areas, I don't know, but in the not too distant past, we've lost St Peter's Centre as a community hub. The Royal British Legion on North Road is closed down and is now for sale. The church is setting up as a community hub, but there are issues there at St Peter's, that is. So really the library is the last thing that's left presently. The other thing that concerns me is that we have an ageing population, of which I'm one. And I just wanted to make the point that if you were going to move the library or combine the two libraries, I'd really be appreciative. You've got to find somewhere, of course, and looking at Parkstone, I'm looking at churches, which is a possibility. But there is an ageing people, and and they have to walk, or quite often they have to walk, given the nature of it. And there is a car park nearby. So, and the other thing I would say about Parkstone, if I may, just one last thing, is that for the size of the library, it has an amazing footfall. I know the boiler doesn't work and you can't get but there is also an upstairs which is not being used, and that seems an awful shame to me. But then there may be things that I'm not aware of, and I'm quite conscious about the repairs that need doing to the building. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to come in and respond to those points, Linda?
I guess just to reassure really that Parkstone is, you know, a well-used library. It pulls from a couple of wards. The space on the ground floor where the library is really inhibited by all the accessibility bits that have had to be put in. And ideally we would love to see it in a better building that could thrive. The upstairs floors are completely inaccessible. We couldn't open those up in the current building, and there are quite a number of repair needs in that building. So that's why we flagged it as, you know, if there's an opportunity arises at some point, we'd want to look at it, but there is no immediate funding available to do anything to, find another site or etc. So it's one we'll just keep within the life of the strategy and see where we go.
Thank you. Yes, I have Councillor Walters next.
Thank you, Chair. Some of these are kind of just ideas, and if they've not been considered before, or they've been considered before and they've been thought to be silly, then let me know. But one thing I was thinking about is the ability for residents to donate to our library service. When they do take out a book is something that I think would be interesting. I mean, ultimately, in my mind, quite often these days, when I'm looking at a purchase, I'm looking at how much does this cost versus how many hours of entertainment am I going to get for it. And that is why I'll use my Audible credits to get the longest book possible. In that, so far, I mean, that a £1 for a donation every time you take a book out as an optional donation could raise some amount of money. I'm not sure if it's been considered or not in the past, but I don't know. Has it?
Chair. We're not allowed to charge. We do take donations. We're not explicit in, that kind of donate every time you take a book. I think that'd be a bit close to the statutory ability to say the books are free to everybody and we don't charge. But we are putting together a donations framework, particularly because we have big repair bills and stuff like that, and lots of wants in terms of zoning and bean bags and study desks and stuff. I am working on a framework and I've had some internal conversations about how we frame that and our ability to be able to then host that on the website. Advice currently is you pick 1 or 2 projects at a time, but I think it would be useful to have a kind of general donation ability where people can donate money and then it's ring fenced for the library service, and then we use it for whatever purpose. But we just need to think through the mechanics of that and bring that together in a decision record. So it's work in progress.
Chair, do you mind? I've
No,
got,
carry
2
on.
more.
Yeah.
So it mentioned in the report that you've used neighbourhood seal funding in the past to get certain things through. Now that's just reopened again. I'm wondering, have you guys got like a proactive list of projects that you're putting in front of councillors as soon as that opens up, so that they don't give it to other organisations, getting ahead of it? Because that's what tends to happen in my ward. Is one resident association comes to me and says we want this, and then by the time the 10th ones come to me, I've kind of said yes to enough things now that nothing else can happen. And then the other thing is, if you've got councils with large enough meeting rooms for 25 people and a handful of potential viewers, there are 3 new town councils that need places to live coming through in the future, and I'm sure places like Bournemouth Library, Poole Library would be ideal places for their public meetings, and you guys could get some revenue from that.
Do you want to respond?
Just in relation to the seal, I think I was in a seal meeting recently when I messaged Linda about whether or not we had any suitable library projects, exactly because the neighbourhood seal part of it, there are funds in some areas, not always in the places we would like to be able to grab hold of some money to deal with some of the issues we face. But yeah, we definitely kind of either know or need to know what our priorities are, so that we can take advantage of all those opportunities as they arise. So yeah, we're quite plugged into those opportunities, definitely. Was it this question?
I think I'd just add, sorry, Chair. I think I'd just add that we don't tend to know when that bidding round opens as officers. We then see bids coming in through councillors and think, oh, it's open, and so being on the front foot of that is, I think, where we want to be. And yes, even today we were looking at a particular library because a councillor had made an inquiry looking at what those were. So we have got the list of staff asks, we've got the list of what the survey told us around what the children applied for, said they would like, etc., for each library. So it's just a case of us dumping into all the detail for that library and picking it out and saying, right, we'd like this, that and the other, and then obviously it's your choice what you'd like to support.
I think that's a really interesting suggestion, and it could be approaching a recommendation as well, Councillor Walters, if you wanted to make it into one, around a bit of joined up work to make sure that the libraries service has got its needs out there linked up toward councillors.
Yeah, I suppose a recommendation that take a look at the pot. Think about which libraries are in which wards, and maybe even just build up a couple of years worth of nice to have smaller projects that you can just, as soon as it opens, just ping over an email. That's not a recommendation, I'm aware of that.
It was just if you wanted to formulate
No,
it, have a think.
A recommendation.
I'm hoping Councillor Macro is thinking about hers too. Well-formed recommendations in a minute, very welcome.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have, yes, I have now Councillor Waite.
Thank you. I've got a couple of quick ones and a substantive. So if you don't mind coming back to me for the long one, and I can just get my quick ones out of the way. So I think it was Councillor Marston who mentions the repair shop, which I really love, but I also really like sitting in the quiet coach on the train. And I wonder if, there is a sort of balance to be struck here. Yes, it's not fashionable anymore to say, shush, it's a library, but, Tesco have got quiet hour. Can't we have some quiet hours in the timetable somewhere? That's a consideration. Donations. I'm not sure that people would be keen to do that. Maybe your neighbours are posher than mine, I don't know. But I mean, I use Dorset libraries, and I'm already quite conscious that they don't have to pay reservation fees, but I do as a BCP resident, and it feels a bit unfair in the whole, Libraries West conglomerate. I can't see people really volunteering to make additional payments when other people in Libraries West are not doing that. But I do think that the reservation fee would represent sort of additional value if you could go pick up your book after hours, pick out a card, get it out of the, Amazon box, that kind of thing. But obviously not that sophisticated, because that would be expensive. There would probably be other people's reservations in that box. So there would have to be like an element of trust, like you already have with the open access. But that just would make it easier. You think you can drop off at any library at any time. I think that, I would like pick up to be that easy. And third quick one regarding Councillor Walters' maybe recommendation. I think I would put the onus on ward councillors to be reaching out to their libraries rather than libraries to be reaching out to ward councillors. Sandra Moore does it, it's not, and it can be done. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Waite. I have got 3 more people listed who want to speak. I'm aware that time is passing, and so I'm going to say that these 3, and then we'll move to potentially some recommendations and conclusions. So the next person on my list was Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I've been looking at the recommendations and reflecting on the discussion that we had in relation to the budget last week. This is a strategy without any money, and that worries me a lot. So in terms of the recommendations, one of the recommendations is about the implementation of open access technology in 4 libraries. So this is me declaring an interest. That does not include Boscombe, which is in my ward. The neighbourhood SIL money in Boscombe and Folkestone is somewhat different to what it is anywhere else because it has a neighbourhood plan group. So that group receives the SIL money. So my question is, if I can find you some SIL money from the neighbourhood plan group, can I then have open access technology in Boscombe and support to create a friends group in Boscombe? Because I've read the framework for friends group, and it does feel like several hurdles that people have to overcome. It's not straightforward, in my judgment. So I'm looking for the council to get out of the way, frankly, and allow the sort of things that Councillor Martin has described in terms of arts and culture to happen, because I know we can do it in Boscombe, because it's that sort of place. But I need access to that library in order to be able to do it. So I don't want to have to go through 17 hoops to get a friends group to open the library longer in order that I can do all of this stuff. So some recommendation that encompasses that list of desires would be great. And also, if Councillor Macro would like to be locked in Boscombe Library overnight, I'm sure I could arrange it.
Okay, we'll come to that in a bit. Would you like to? Would anyone like to respond to Councillor Canavan around those points?
Well, I'll probably go first, and Linda might want to add something. I think obviously our 4 libraries at the moment were based on the opportunity, the size, the geography, and various factors. And hopefully if we're successful, we'll get the lion's share of the funding to deliver them from the Arts Council. In general terms, in delivering open access technology, it's probably around £100,000 per library, something of that kind of order. We'll find out a little bit more as we go through that process a little bit more. But and I know we did originally talk, didn't we, about whether Boscombe would be one of those, given where the library would be and all sorts of, the community centre being built. I think you were talking about the existing library site and having that access in that building. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what you're thinking about the delivery side. Sorry.
I'm talking about the timetable. So the 4 that we've got with to at the minute is will be developed over an 18-month time plan. And obviously that takes the resource from the in-house team to actually go in and do the structural works, as well as the tender to get the access put in. So I think adding a 5th to that, it would be where, when, and the rationale around that library over any other library. So, you know, it's almost like what is the next tranche we need to go to for open access? If it's as popular and everyone wants it, that's great because it gives more access to residents and communities, but it's how we resource that as almost a second stage to the 4 that we've already got on the planner.
Okay.
Sorry.
Councillor Canavan, did you want to come back?
Well, I mean, it just reinforces my point about how difficult this is being made for people. And I'll come back to my point that, you know, I've been trying through the health and wellbeing group to get community hubs for 2 years now, and still haven't achieved it. Now, if this is an opportunity to get one in my ward, then why can't I do it? I don't want to wait 2 years to have to do it. Because I've been waiting 2 years already. So this is excruciatingly slow. And, you know, it's part of the bureaucracy, which I think I was hoping that we'd actually have a bit more vision and imagination to overcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Dedman next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think it's a really good, no, not report, plan. And I think I said before that I'm very conscious that these are very forward-facing things. Everybody knows where their library is, I'm pretty sure. And I think if we didn't go ahead with all this, and if we did start thinking, well, it's an asset, why do we need it? I think there would be a huge amount of reputational damage. I know that Dorset County Council tried quite a few things. Coal Hill Library, for example, tried to run it with volunteers, and I think that it failed, and they took it back in-house and things like that. You can't muck about with these things. So I'm totally in favour of what has been suggested. I also want to say, as usual, that Christchurch, of course, is way ahead on all this. Christchurch is basically a community hub. You're looking at me, Matty, but I think I'm right here, that when the Civic Centre shut, a lot of the work that was done there in social services, we have little rooms there now for people to have interviews, things like that. We have top floors where, in fact, Oliver said something about town councils, although I think we don't mention them too much at the moment, but our town council in Christchurch meets in our library. So it is a very, very varied offer. Well, the one thing that I would, Councillor Beasley has gone, but he mentioned that it's got to be commercialised. I totally don't agree. I think libraries are very much a service for the community. Our building was given to Christchurch by the Druitt family. It is a very old building. It probably is in need of repair, although a lot of internal work has been done. But yes, I think we have to give a service. I think, as you said, we can't charge for it. It's one of the things we give. And I think, yes, I think that everything in this plan should go ahead. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. The final person I have down to speak is Councillor Trent.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah,
Quick, briefly.
yeah. Last time I was in Rossmore Library, one of the conversations I had was about the they used to serve coffee, and that was stopped because it was costing, it wasn't making any money. But that was a fairly small facility. But we potentially got larger libraries that may have a facility. And when I was in Singapore, I witnessed on a Saturday morning something which I thought it'd be nice if that could come back here, and that was there was a local Starbucks in which all the kids met there to do their homework on a Saturday morning and sort of talk about, you know, their schoolwork and so on. Whether we've got the same kind of social kind of attitudes to sort of do that here, where the coolest place to be on a Saturday morning is doing your homework in a Starbucks. But I actually wonder, and this goes back to the sort of bit about making commercial use of some of our spaces. If you had an operator like Starbucks in a suitable sized library operating sort of, well, operating for the library users anyway, but you know, drawing in young people on a Saturday, or even if the libraries themselves kind of created something like that, you know, it's got to be the right environment. It's got to be somewhere where people think, oh yeah, I'm going to check that out. That sounds interesting. Whether that's actually something to consider, because as I say, I was really surprised how busy it was, how many young people, you know, it was obviously a magnet. And whether that's something that can be thought about, maybe linked with the commercialisation, because obviously if you get a lot of young people turn up in one place at one time, they're probably spending a fair bit of small amounts of money, so it kind of ticks the commercialisation box possibly.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. We've had quite a few interesting ideas come out, and I think I'm just going to go back to, I think Councillor Waits indicated she's got a recommendation. Can I just check, have I got any other budding recommendations coming forward? Another one from Councillor Walters. Okay, lovely. Councillor Waite, first of all.
It's an idea to explore at this stage, if there's support for it in the room. I haven't sort of put down a forum of words, but this was kind of the substantive point that I said I wanted to come on to, because I am very much in favour of open access, but I welcome it as an enhancement to our existing service, and I am nervous that it could be seen as a compensation for a loss of staffed hours, but it's those staffed hours that are really important to the disadvantaged groups, like kids being able to go in and do their homeworks in the afternoon. I mean, having that facility for me is more important than nice to have. I mean, for people like me, I mean, I could buy books if I had to. I just choose to be a little bit penny pinchy. Somebody said earlier, why not 6 or 8 hubs? But I think having 4 is about the right balance, because I don't think that open access is the answer to the problem that I'm concerned about, which is, you know, the space for vulnerable groups. So if there is support in this committee, I would want to make a recommendation that we look to sustain staffed hours, especially in the afternoons, as open access is rolled out and potentially gains more dominance in the future.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? I'm Councillor Maxwell seconding. So thank you for that. I think do we want anybody want to have any further comment on that, or would we be happy to?
Oh no, let's think of words now.
Well, Claire, did you get a clear enough set of words on that? It was around a recommendation that the number of staffed hours is maintained even after open access is implemented, and that open access doesn't become a reason to reduce staffed hours. I think that's fairly clear. I hope the committee agrees with me. Yes, so I think everyone's fairly clear on the recommendation. Anybody wanted to say anything, or are we happy? Councillor Walters.
You have the words, if possible, into it, because if we're throwing off the budget completely by doing this, it might make sense to give them some breathing room.
It's a recommendation. It's not a decision. We're
yeah,
we're an ONS board.
I wouldn't want them to just sort of throw it out if it becomes unaffordable. I think the next step would be volunteers rather than cutting hours down, but we'll come to it when we come to it, I suppose. You can't really plan for 5 years ahead at this stage, can we?
So with that, with some wording around the art of the possible.
Yes, yes.
Are we happy?
Sorry, can I just check? Is it a recommendation you want to make to Cabinet, or do you want to?
Well, that's a good question. So it's a recommendation. Yes, I think it is an additional recommendation to Cabinet from our discussions, isn't it? Since this is a Cabinet report. Yeah, I think so. Shall we go to a vote on that then? Can I see all those in favour of adopting that recommendation?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in favour.
And anyone against? And any abstentions? That's 1 abstention. Thank you. Councillor Walters, did you want to put something forward as well?
It was just the ONS. Sorry, thank you very much. You're welcome. The ONS board recommends the library service puts together a number of smaller neighbourhood sill beds to put to councillors immediately upon the opening of current and future sill rounds.
Okay. Is there someone who'd like to second that? Councillor Canavan, are you seconding?
I thought Councillor Wade was seconded. My
Okay.
quibble with it is that's not possible for Boscombe. But I would want the facility to use some of that SIL money from the Boscombe and Folkestones SIL fund to do, to try and do something to support to support Boscombe Library.
And my understanding is that it's a different process in Boscombe because of your neighbourhood plan. So I guess there's still there's a route through to using the money for Boscombe Library. It's just it wouldn't be identical to the one that exists in areas where there isn't a neighbourhood plan.
You're right, yeah. But the problem is I don't want to hit the obstacle of officers saying sorry, but you can't do it because I want to do it.
Yeah. Councillor Walters.
Maybe add some language in here because at the moment it says the ONS board recommends the library service puts together a number of smaller neighbourhood sill beds to put to councillors. If we add in and neighbourhood forums immediately upon the opening of current and future sill rounds, that would then include that.
Good. That got a thumbs up from Councillor Canavan for the live stream. So yes, okay, that sounds clear. And Councillor Waite, you seconded. So are we happy to go to a vote on that now as well? Yes? Great. Can I see all those in favour of that recommendation going forward to Cabinet?
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. That's great. I don't know if we wanted to... I feel as though the general mood in the room has been very supportive of the strategy. I haven't heard, there have been lots of interesting questions and suggestions for different things we could do, but I haven't heard much in the way of anyone expressing concerns or worries. So I don't know if, as a board, we're happy to overall support the recommendations in the paper to take it forward to Cabinet. What do people feel? Is that feels like? Yeah, okay. So I think by consensus, therefore, we can also state that we support those recommendations and take that to Cabinet as well. I just wanted to reflect on one other thing, which is really for our future work on this topic. Quite a lot of people have talked about the income generation. Some people have referred to it as commercialisation. Others have said they don't like that, and I understand why. But the income generation aspect, so whether that's hiring out the spaces or whether it's having donations or whether, doing interesting different ideas within the libraries. I thought that this might merit our board doing a bit more of a deep dive into this particular area, and therefore we might consider putting on our work programme something specifically around the income generating potential. And I know that it's in the strategy that that one of the sort of threads of this strategy is to work with the economic development team on opportunities, and I think that would be of a lot of interest to us, to the board, to see how that develops, and perhaps we can put that on our work programme for, I don't know, 6 months' time or a year's time to to hear more about that, how that's developing, and really get into that specific aspect of the use of our libraries. Does that sound okay to everybody? I'll put that forward just for our work planning. All right, lovely. Okay, well, I think that's probably concludes our meeting. I'm just checking I haven't missed something. In which case, I was going to say thank you very much to Councillor Martin. Thank you to Matty and Linda as well for a really useful discussion that we've had today. And thank you all as well. And I'll close the meeting. Good evening.